15 years, blowing the doors off the competition. Podcasting to planet Earth.
PNRNetworks.com.
This podcast is a member of the Blueberry Network. Blueberry. No E's. That's Blueberry, BLUBRRY.com. Blueberry.com.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
That meteor is 5 miles wide and it's definitely going to hit us.
Are you ready to go back to Titanic?
You'll kill yourself for nothing if you explode that bomb.
Something hit us! All the flight crew is either dead or badly injured. Oh my God, help us!
Last summer, 2 comets were discovered that are on a collision course with Earth.
Oh my God.
It seems the worst is over.
You've just been sucked into the Catastrophe Vortex with T.C. Kirkham. Greetings and welcome to the show that focuses mostly on that so Hollywood, although it's spread around the world, art form, the disaster film. Welcome to Catastrophe Vortex. I'm T.C. Kirkham. We're going to have a couple of things this week. We're going to talk about this week's movie of the week. We're also going to talk about something I posted about yesterday as I'm recording this, which would have been June 7th. What was the one I posted it? And we'll go over that at the end of the show. But first up, as I come to you for our usual disasters, we're going to go back all the way to 1933. It's a disaster film that most people probably have not seen, and it is one that is considered by most film historians to be Hollywood's first ever catastrophe film. In fact, it's also the first post-apocalyptic film because of its subject line and its storyline. If you've never seen it, you can. As of right now, I don't know how long it'll last, but as of right now, the entire film is available on YouTube. You can also rent it from Kino Lorber's Kino Now website for $4.99. But well, let's talk about it before you decide to do that. 1933's Deluge.
Continuing our information and instructions. The quake center is shifting eastward. Slight shocks have been felt in this area. The populace again warned to evacuate all buildings. If possible, leave the city. All East River bridges declared unsafe.
RKO Pictures released Deluge in 1933. It is based on the best-selling novel by British author S. Fowler Wright. The book became his biggest hit. It was printed in 1928, and it, of course, was set in England. The film version, done by RKO, is set in America, mostly outside of the New York area, and It's kind of a half and half movie. The first half sets up everything with the big disaster, and then the second half turns into a post-disaster survival story of sorts. Let's start with the first 20 minutes of the film. First of all the people that are in it, the only name star that would probably be recognized by most people today is Edward Van Sloan. Van Sloan plays the head of the university scientific unit, Professor Carlyle. He's only in the first 20 minutes of the film. Of course, Van Sloan, best known as Van Helsing from Dracula and as Dr. Henry Frankenstein's mentor in Frankenstein. He jumped to RKO for these two features. Both of those were for Universal. And he is he's a very familiar face to anyone familiar with those two earlier films. It starts off with, we get right into it at the very beginning. The people who run the New York Weather Bureau are wondering why the natural barometric patterns are changing so fast. The barometer has been dropping for days and keeps dropping and dropping and dropping. And as we go through a variety of different scenes where we see people doing normal things, the forecast office decides to warn everybody, say, something is going to happen. So we see a Coast Guard officer broadcasting to ships, both in port and at sea, saying they should all be in port. If they're in port, don't leave. If you're not in port, get to port as soon as you can. We also hear him later also calling in all airplanes to land. Also, amazingly enough, one of the few dirigibles in action at that time, the USS Macon. I always thought it was Macon, like the city. We actually see footage of the dirigible in action. It was during the time when I believe it was the Navy was using them for a few things. In the meantime, the barometric pressure continues to drop, and suddenly, with no warning, as they're looking through their instruments, everything gets dark, and they run to the window. A sudden eclipse of the sun has started to occur. Apparently, it wasn't forecast. I don't know if they could forecast them back then. I would assume probably they could have if they'd followed Galileo's teachings. I don't know. But they were all convinced that this was a harbinger of doom. We see a bunch of newspaper headlines, catastrophe imminent, is this the end of the world, Earth is doomed, etc., etc. And then the big fun starts when we see a building start to shake in Los Angeles, and we switch to the university, where Professor Carlisle is heading up his team, now alerted by the Weather Bureau to keep an eye on things. And they are getting readings from the West Coast that the entire West Coast of the United States has been devastated by a massive earthquake and is now underwater from the Pacific Ocean. Okay. Keep in mind, this was in 1933. A lot of the science we know about earthquakes and tsunamis were not yet in evidence. Most of those were figured out during what is known as the International Geophysical Year. If you don't know what that is, listen to the Donald Fagen song, IGY. It'll explain it to you. We continue to hear bulletins from the newscaster at the International Broadcasting Company, as opposed to the National Broadcasting Company, because NBC probably would have gotten pissed off, talking about different areas of the country that have been devastated. We hear about how Chicago is doomed, and Detroit, and New Orleans. They continue to receive ticker tape information at the university as the professors look over all of the devastation that's hitting throughout America. In the meantime, in the midst of all these disasters, we meet a woman named Claire. Claire is a competitive swimmer who is preparing to set a record. Swimming, I believe, they never said, but it's implied that she plans to swim around Manhattan Island. I'm not sure. She's the Gertrude Ederle of her day. Anyway, her swim is called off by the local authorities because of the impending disaster. So she takes an offer from one of the people with her, prepping her for this, to go into the countryside for a few days to rest. In the meantime, we meet Martin Webster and his wife Helen, who are protecting their two small children and hopefully are trying to ride out the disaster in what looks like a Westchester County type place when it comes to New York. They're somewhere in the New York vicinity. We don't see where. We see the exteriors of this nice 2-story house. And she is increasingly alarmed, and he is listening to the weather reports on the radio. And finally, when part of their chimney collapses, he decides it's time to move the kids and his wife to the stone quarry near the house. Okay, so we have an earthquake coming, supposedly, and floodwaters coming. So you're going to take them to a place that is far lower than the high house up on the hill? I'm not gonna debate the logic here. He takes them down, he takes the kids down, leaves them by themselves in this quarry pit against this hard rock, big boulder, wind blowing everywhere. He makes his way back up the hill and goes and fetches his wife, who has been trapped in debris as the part of the roof collapsed, gets her down there, and then goes back the following morning to get provisions, clothes, supplies. They wait out the night. Nothing terrible has reached New York yet. But as he's in the house, the big one strikes New York. We see an incredible 4.5 minute footage montage of New York being utterly destroyed by a massive earthquake, followed by the tsunami waves from the Atlantic Ocean triggered by the earthquake coming in and inundating all of New York. Wow, this is really something. We see people screaming, running out of buildings. We see building after building collapsing. We see people we've come to see in the weather office and in the university getting devastated by this earthquake. And finally, we see the entire skyline of New York has been reduced to rubble and is now flooding and slowly becoming submerged because of the waters. We see Martin in his home, unconscious, knocked unconscious by a blow to the head as this disaster happens. We fade to black. When we come back, there are shots of clouds. There had been parts of the montage where religious leaders, one of them fiery and angry, the other, God will take care of us. And it opens on Martin. And Martin looks around and there's nothing as far as the eyes can see. It's all been flattened. There's no buildings. There's no anything. He's essentially laying on a large beach, it looks like, but it's probably in the middle of town or on a hill. And he has recovered, and he gets up and stumbles off looking for whatever, civilization. He can find his wife and daughter nowhere. Wife and children, daughters. I believe one is a son, actually. Can find them nowhere. And sadly walks off, grief-stricken, builds a shelter, and tries to survive on his own. Now, here is where the movie takes a giant leap, veering from the first 20 minutes, which is all about the disaster, to the last 45 minutes, which is all about the aftermath. The problem is, once we get past the disaster, which is exciting and thrilling, especially for the time of when it was made, 1933, we steer straight into melodrama, and it goes downhill from there. Two other survivors are out there, somewhere in the New York City outskirts. Their names are Jepson and Norwood. And they find a lady unconscious, washed up on the shore. It turns out to be the swimmer, Claire. She recovers slowly, and staying with the men for a day or two. But as she recovers, the men start feuding over her and becoming very possessive. She starts to realize that she is probably the only woman anywhere nearby, and that's going to lead to all kinds of problems. She becomes uncomfortable with their fighting, and while they're fighting, she sneaks out the door and flees across the water that's in front of where they're staying. She's a world-class swimmer. She can see land elsewhere and obviously takes off for it. She does not want to be involved with this, and the men become vengeful and angry. Jepson kills his pal Norwood and begins to search for Claire. He's determined to get her back. She washes up later on another shore where she is found by Martin, who has built a shelter nearby. Martin and Claire become good friends over the course of a few days, and eventually, not knowing the situation and not knowing what could happen, they fall in love with each other. Martin believes that his wife and children are dead, and And Claire is around, who is not shown to have anybody directly tied to her, obviously is alone also. In a nearby town, so I'm going to assume this is somewhere on Long Island, maybe, survivors are gathering and they're starting to put together a new civilization. What we see, but what Martin doesn't see, is that one of those survivors is Martin's wife, Helen, and both their children. They were found by one of the townsmen named Tom, and he's been taking care of them ever since. He's also fallen deeply in love with Helen, but Helen has herself convinced that Martin is somehow still alive. She's right about that. Martin and Claire try to make a life for themselves. He's not aware that his wife is still alive. And eventually, Jepsen finds a gang of thugs as he gets to the town, and he wants to have them help him try to find Claire, because Claire is his, so he says. They track Martin and Claire down outside of this town, and thankfully Claire is able to tell Martin what happened earlier. They eventually get to a mine shaft where they stumble upon the situation, and meanwhile the townspeople have been after this gang of thugs. They've been robbing and the people and causing problems in the town. Sounds a lot like what's going on in the world today with what happens after the peaceful protests. You get thugs coming in and taking advantage of it, which is exactly what happened here. The townspeople searching for these thugs stumble upon what's going on with Martin and Claire stuck in the mine shaft, and Jepsen and his thugs trying to get them out. The townspeople come in and save Martin and Claire and bring them back to their new town. Oh boy, awkward. Once they get there, Martin discovers that his wife is still alive. He sees his children and follows them back to where his wife is and goes to her. The other two parties involved, Helen's new savior Tom and Claire, who's fallen in love with Martin, are completely devastated. Problem is, Martin's a bit of a simp and he can't make up his mind. He tells Claire that he is in love with her, but he's also in love with his wife, and that he will not choose between them. And I'm thinking to myself, you're trying to get the best of both worlds here, dude? I don't know. The next day, Helen visits Claire. They have a painful but frank discussion. Claire says she will not give up Martin, that she loves him. And Helen basically says that she's not going to give him up either. She understands why she loves him, because she loves him. But later, when they're out that day, Claire sees Martin with his wife. They're at the town meeting, and it's too much for her. She decides that she isn't as strong as she thought she was, and she runs away, headed for the beach, where she jumps in the ocean and swims away. Martin chased after her, but he's left on the beach watching her go. The end. It's only a 70-minute movie. The first 20 minutes are the best 20 minutes. It was released by RKO Pictures in 1933, August 13th. It starred Peggy Shannon as Claire, Sidney Blackmer as Martin, Lois Wilson as Helen, Matt Moore as Tom, Fred Kohler as Jepsen, Ralph Harold as Norwood, Edward Van Sloan as Professor Carlisle, and Samuel Hines as the chief weather forecaster. They opened the movie with a reminder from Genesis chapter 9, verse 11, where God promises that he will not take a flood to destroy the earth again. I kind of wonder what the questioning on that is, because they kind of showed him doing exactly that. Earthquakes with it this time, though. The writer of the novel, S. Fowler Wright, was very unhappy with some aspects of the film. He felt they changed it too much and did not like the way it had ended. His book ended differently. He watched the later scenes being shot, was disappointed about the changes, and later wrote in his diary that he felt the film was ghastly and advised his children not to see it. Ironically, the film became a staple of stock footage. The destruction scenes in New York, which were entirely filmed in Los Angeles, by the way, became a source of footage for future disasters and other non-disaster films. You saw some of the footage in SOS Tidal Wave, 1939, Dick Tracy vs. Crime Inc. in 1941, and King of the Rocket Men in 1949. Republic Pictures bought the rights to use the special effects footage in their productions over the years. This was the first film to capture the total destruction of New York City. We would see it a lot in the future. It was destroyed in I don't know how many different films. Meteor comes to mind in 1979, which they reused that footage for the Nostradamus film, The Man Who Saw Tomorrow, in 1981. They also basically recreated this entire destruction of New York City in the Roland Emmerich disaster film The Day After Tomorrow in 2004. I have to say, though, for 1933, the effects were top-notch. These guys really put together a hell of a sequence. I'm actually surprised it wasn't nominated for some Oscars for the works it did. The movie received positive but mixed reviews, and was a modest hit for RKO when it came out, and was considered a lost film for many, many years. A full copy of the film could not be found. Over the years, it was thought to have been one of Hollywood's great lost films. And then, everyone's favorite monster man, Forrest J. Ackerman, stumbled upon a print that was dubbed in Italian in a film archive in Italy in the 1980s. He subsequently told a number of other people they were able to make a nitrate duplicate of it, and eventually a English soundtrack duplicate was found, also in Italy, I believe. And Lobster Films stepped in and made a 2K scan restoration of the film, and the restoration was picked up for release and theatrical release as well by Kino Lorber in 2017, and it's been available ever since. The film is, I'm going to be honest, it's not one of my favorite disaster films. I got it specifically because I read about it in Film Comment, I believe, may have been Cineast, I'm not sure, about it coming out, and it is considered the first disaster film released by Hollywood. The storyline, like I said, the first 20 minutes, the disaster is right in your face the minute we start in the film, and it takes the first 18 minutes until we get to that shot of Martin waking up after the disaster, lying on the beach or wherever he's lying. The footage, the special effects, the acting for 1933 were incredibly well done, and I mean, you would have to. I would compare the effects for the time to another film famous for destruction than the 2008 film, 2012, and possibly the 2012 film San Andreas as well, or 2014. I forget which year that came out. The destruction sequences were the 1933 equivalent of those films, and they were just amazing. I wish the film as a whole was better, because the melodramatic stuff about the love story and the possible triangle, I just lost interest after about 15 minutes, and I was watching my phone, how much longer. If they'd stretched the disaster out a bit more, got a little bit more into it, I think I would have enjoyed it more. It is definitely worth seeing for the first 20 minutes. As I said, right now, it is available on YouTube. Somebody has posted the entire Kino Lorber restoration on there. I don't know how long it'll last there, because technically that's not very kosher. But you can see it. If it disappears from YouTube, you can rent it at Kino Now, Kino Lorber's online viewing service, available on the internet, available on Fire, Roku, a number of other places. It's $4.99, and in all honesty, It is a restored print. It looks fantastic. It is, the first 20 minutes are worth it, and definitely worth the $4.99 fee. I hope that you guys will check it out and let me know what you think of it. I'm curious to see what your opinion of this film is. Deluge from 1933. Okay, time to have a little fun here. A little more fun. I posted yesterday on the website as this is being recorded. WatchMojo.com, one of the most popular list programs on YouTube, posted its the best disaster movies list, A to Z. And I have to be honest, this list is so not very well done. I am not happy, and I mean I'm gonna run them down. I have them on the website over at Catastrophe Vortex. If you want to see them, you have to highlight them to see the whole list. But I'm gonna run down the whole list right here. So if you haven't seen the video yet, it is up on our site. You can also look it up on YouTube. Basically, what they did is they included disaster movies, picked one movie per letter, with the idea that at the end of that you would have the definitive collection of disaster. They're not even close. Some of these films I wouldn't consider disaster films. And I don't know about you guys, but most disaster buffs that I've talked to, disaster film buffs I've talked to, the disaster itself has to be either the main focal point or a very, very strong supporting character. In several of these movies, it either happened a while ago or is upcoming and we don't really see it. And I'm like, that's not a disaster film. They also didn't include any films that involved aliens, monsters, or zombies. But they did include virus films, which I thought that was interesting in itself. They also picked two different movies about the same disaster. If you're going to do a real-life disaster, you should have to pick the definitive movie about that disaster and just go with the one. As such, they eliminated possibly the greatest American disaster film of the 1970s. Wasn't even included. So, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to run down the list from A to Z, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about each thing. And some of them, you have to give them a break in some areas because not every letter has a perfect fit for these. But they did stretch it a few times. They made a joke out of one because there are no X. There's no disaster movie that I can think of that starts with X. So they kind of played with it. But it was an interesting list, and I don't agree with it. Not by a long shot, but here we go. In alphabetical order, the best disaster films of all time, according to WatchMojo.com. A to Z are Armageddon, Beasts of the Southern Wild, Contagion, The Day After Tomorrow, Earthquake, Fearless, the 1993 film, Grey Lady Down, Hard Rain, really? The Impossible, a movie called Jet, which is not the actual title of that film, Krakatoa East of Java, oh my god, Last Night, Melancholia, A Night to Remember, Outbreak, The Poseidon Adventure, The Quake, Runaway Train, San Andreas, Titanic, Until the End of the World, Volcano, The Wave. X was X-Men Apocalypse, and then they delivered a funny line online. Oops, wrong kind of disaster. And that they did. I mean, I understand that, and that was actually funny. Y was Y2K, and Z was 0 hour. Now, I'm like, are you kidding? The letters D and T are impossible. There are so many different disaster movies that are titled with D and titled with T. There are also quite a few with A. And they eliminated the and a, so on. They also didn't do nuclear movies, and they had to be natural or accidental. There could be no deliberate man-made disasters like terrorism films. And I'm like, okay, I don't get these. Again, some of these just don't fit. Let's start with Jet. Jet's film, the title of that film is Ground Control, not Jet. Jet is an alternate title. Now, Watch Mojo is based in Canada. I don't know whether it was released as Jet in Canada, but it is an alternate title, so I don't really think that counts. I also, while some of these are excellent choices, and I have to admit, you can't get much better than The Impossible. What I've seen of it, I still have not seen it yet, and I'm going to for the show. And Night to Remember, which is easily the best movie ever made about Titanic, along with the two wonderful Norwegian films, The Quake and The Wave. There are some top-notch films on here. But leaving off The Towering Inferno for Titanic, if you picked A Night to Remember, then Titanic should have been eliminated automatically. Forget the fact that it's the second highest grossing film of all time. It was more of a love story. It wasn't really about the disaster. The Towering Inferno should have been T. I have a problem with H also. While Hard Rain, I've heard, is a good movie, I've never seen it, and it has a great cast. I have not seen it, and picking Hard Rain over a classic like The High and the Mighty makes absolutely no sense to me. The High and the Mighty was really the first of the early wave of disaster films. It came out along with 0 Hour and a few others in the 50s and early 60s, all of which are tremendously good films. I also question Volcano. Volcano was great special effects, but it's just a terrible movie. And if you have, it's great special effects. It is exciting. When I say terrible, I mean I didn't like the totally scientific and plausible way it happened, and I also didn't like the combination of Tommy Lee Jones and Anne Heche. I didn't think they had any chemistry together. I would have picked Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, which involves an asteroid setting the Van Allen belt on fire. That definitely qualifies as a disaster. And it was accidental, so it would have fit and been a lot better fit than Volcano. Now, last night, I'd never heard of until we saw this list. Apparently, this is set in the moments before the Earth is set to end in 1999. The disaster's never shown. It's implied, so that automatically kicks it out. The same with Melancholia. You don't really see anything. It's all about the anticipation. Again, to me, not a disaster film. And while I admit that there are disaster elements of Fearless, the 1993 film, it isn't about the disaster. It's more of a character piece about the people involved. The disaster kind of takes back seat. The same, I guess, can be said for Jet. I've never seen that. It really doesn't come into play at all in Beasts of the Southern Wild. Beasts of the Southern Wild, one of my favorite films of that year, by the way, it was in my Baker's Dozen, deals with a fantasy version of Katrina. It's a fantasy. It's supposed to be a fantasy. And, again, it isn't really relevant to what's going on in the movie itself. It's just kind of a backdrop-y thing. So I don't know if I would include that. But there aren't many other movies with B that could actually qualify. If you allow terrorism, you could include Bullet Train from Japan. If you allow nature run amok, you could include The Birds or even the god-awful Birdemic. But it just is a very iffy. I also question two virus movies, Contagion and Outbreak. There were virus movies that were more of a disaster. These were strictly virus movies. And so was Virus, the 1980 Japanese-American film. But there were things about viruses that were more of a disaster film, like The Cassandra Crossing, which, yes, it is a bad film. I remember parts of it being bored simple, but, Richard Harris, Sophia Loren, you got a cast to die for. And it would have probably been more appropriate in some ways. And so would the Andromeda Strain. Again, that was an accident. It was about a crash of a satellite that had acquired a germ in space. And the original version, not the knockoffs they've done, remakes they've done. Again, there's all different. It's your mileage may vary. I don't agree with most of this list. I would replace a number of them. I'd like to know what you guys think. Write to me at cv@PNRNetworks.com and see if you can come up with your own A to Z lists of disaster films. It's going to be tough because there aren't that many on some of these letters. And, while, some of the movies are just pure crap, they're fun. San Andreas, not a great film. It's a fun film. It's made fun by a stupendous cast, including Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Carla Gugino, and the wonderful Art Parkinson, who steals every scene he's in, who is best known for Game of Thrones. But he is really awesome in this film. It's a fun movie. It's not scientifically accurate. And 2012 got the shaft also, having been, because they didn't have a number category, so it got shoved into under T. And I still would have picked Towering Inferno over that, and I would not have picked Titanic. But 2012 special effects are some of the best ever. Ever! Write to me, cv@pnrnetworks.com, and let me know what you think of this list and what you would put on your list, and I'll read them on a future show. So be sure to get in touch with me. That's going to do it for this week's foray into the wonderful cloud of catastrophe movies on Catastrophe Vortex. Next week, we are returning to Norway for the sequel to 2016's The Wave. It is 2018's excellent follow-up, The Quake, and we will talk about that next week. Also want to remind you that we have a lot of great other stuff going on here. In addition to Catastrophe Vortex, we also have Subject Cinema. Right now, it is running a mini-series called Subject Cinema Presents Captive Audience Theater, while the theaters are all closed from the COVID-19 outbreak. We also have Front Row 5 and 10 when it should be coming back shortly. My wife, Kim, has several shows, including Platinum Rose's Garden, her supernatural show, which is on hiatus until that show returns, which may not be till September, we're hearing now, for its final 4 episodes, I think it is. She also hosts a great and funny wrestling podcast, Ring Around the Rosie, and a terrific role-play show called Platinum Rose Roleplay. You can get Ring Around the Rosie at ringaroundtherosie.net, Platinum Rose's Garden at platinumrosesgarden.com, and on our YouTube channel, search Platinum Rose Roleplay, and you'll get to hear her over there. We also have some great contributions from Eric and Valerie Lyon. They do a show called K-Babble. It is available at kbabble.com, and we have plenty more in the works, including additions to what is now known as Your Imagination Theater. We have 2 of those up from the past several years. Manhattan Hammer Down As It Happened, our 10th anniversary take on what else was going on in Manhattan the night Clover arrived, a tribute to Cloverfield, and our own 2018 production of The War of the Worlds in tribute to the 70th anniversary of the original broadcast. And I hope that you guys will check those out. Those are available. You can find all of those in the notes below. Just click on them and take a look at them. We also hope that during this trying time, you can find $5 a month to spare for us. We have a program called the PNRNetworks Patrons Circle. It's $5 a month, and your contribution helps us to do renovations on our equipment. I'm in the midst of a major studio upgrade. It also helps pay for all our shows and all of our websites, which in addition to eCinema One, eCinema Boston, and the others associated with the shows, I have a music website, thekirkhamreport.com. We have a music and bookstore site called Planet Bibliomusica, and we have 1 or 2 new sites about to debut, so I hope that you'll come check those out and be a part by donating the cost of a single latte once a month and help us make ends meet and pay our bills and continue to be everything we can for you. You do so by joining the Patron Circle at patreon.com/PNR Networks. And for doing so, you will get your name on our Patreon list, and you'll also get some extra perks coming sometime this summer as soon as we can get them all together. $5 a month is all it is. The PNRNetworks Patrons Circle. Please join. Until next time, when we'll be back with 2018's Norwegian classic, The Quake. For Catastrophe Vortex, I'm TC Kirkham. May you keep your life free of disaster. Until then, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Years, blowing the doors off the competition, podcasting to planet Earth.
PNRNetworks.com